It was a typical night, the kind where you start questioning whether staying awake at 3 a.m. is really worth it. I was working the night shift at the 24-hour Walmart, and honestly, most of my thoughts were focused on how I'd get through those endless hours without any more trouble. The store was a bit quieter than usual, which should have been a sign that something was about to go down. Then he walked in. This guy looked out of place, like he'd stepped out of a cheap suspense movie. He had this shabby coat, unkempt beard, and a look that made you feel uncomfortable just by staring at him. I was in the electronics section, trying to focus on my work when I noticed him watching me. I thought maybe it was just my paranoia, but the feeling of being watched was real and persistent. I tried to distract myself, moved over to the toy section, but the asshole followed me. That's right, he followed me. It wasn't a coincidence. He was literally on my tail. Every aisle I turned down, there he was, at an unsettling distance. My heart was racing, and I was starting to think the night could only get worse. The feeling of being watched wasn't just annoying. He started making weird comments like, "You're here alone, aren't you?" And, "Don't you ever get tired of working so much?" Always with that penetrating gaze. It wasn't just annoying, it was terrifying. I tried to stay calm, but he was starting to look like a textbook stalker. Things took a bizarre turn when he showed up in the employee lounge. I was in there, trying to hide, but I knew it wasn't the safest spot. Then I saw him, standing at the entrance, like he was waiting for me. I was in full-on panic mode. I couldn't understand how he found my hideout. My instinct was to run, but I knew I had to think fast. I got up and tried to slip past him without drawing attention, but he saw me. I bolted, not looking back. The store felt like an endless maze of fluorescent lights and aisles. My heart was in my throat, and I could barely breathe. I tried to keep calm, but the fear was palpable. Every shadow seemed like a threat, and all I wanted was to escape that horrible situation. I made it to the parking lot, and the fresh air never felt so good. I called the police and explained everything that had happened. As I waited, the mix of relief and fear was almost unbearable. When the officers arrived, I watched them head into the store, knowing the situation was about to be resolved. It was a relief to see them quickly find the guy. He was handcuffed and put into the police car with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos he'd caused. The adrenaline was still pumping through me, and the sense of finally being safe was almost a shock. I knew he wouldn't be bothering me anymore, but the experience had left me completely shaken. The cops assured me they'd look into him more thoroughly, and I went home with the feeling that, despite having faced something horrifying, I had managed to get through it. But the memory of that night, the fear, and the tension would stick with me for a long time. And so ended the most terrifying night of my life, a night where reality proved to be much scarier than any fiction. I was just doing my shift at Walmart, dealing with the monotony of the day when something totally unexpected happened. It was an ordinary day until the door swung open and, out of nowhere, there she was, Casey. The last thing I wanted was to see my ex again, especially not at my job. Casey and I had broken up months ago, and since then, life had been a relief. I was starting to recover from her obsession, and now she shows up out of nowhere, at my workplace. You can imagine the scene, me, trying to keep my cool and act professional, and her, with that look on her face like she has something to say, right in the middle of the store. She walked up to my register, and the atmosphere got heavy. Her face had no sign of regret or understanding that I wanted nothing more to do with her. "Hey, how are you?" she said, with that annoying confidence that made me want to disappear. I responded as dryly as I could. "Casey, this isn't the time. Please leave." But no, she wasn't leaving. She started talking about how much she missed me and put on a dramatic show for everyone to see. My coworkers were clearly uncomfortable, and I just wanted someone to rescue me from that situation. The manager eventually came over and managed to get Casey away from me, but the feeling of invasion lingered. It wasn't just the inconvenience of the moment. It was the fear of what she might do next. When I got home that night, the last thing I expected was to find my place turned upside down. The door was ajar, and my heart started racing. I walked in slowly, trying to be cautious. The scene I walked into was unreal. It looked like a full-blown invasion. Drawers open, clothes strewn across the floor, things broken. It was like someone had been desperately searching for something. The tension skyrocketed when I realized the place was completely ransacked. Then I saw a torn note on the floor, written in Casey's unmistakable handwriting. It was like a punch to the gut. I was sure she was after something I didn't even know about. I felt violated, like my privacy had been crushed. Without thinking too much, I called the police. While I waited, the mix of despair and rage grew. I looked around, trying to make sense of the mess she had made. My thoughts were a whirlwind, trying to process how things had escalated to this point. When the police arrived, I showed them everything I'd found. I was exhausted and completely disheartened, but at least something was being done. And then, in what felt like a cruel twist, Casey showed up the next morning. I was trying to get back to my routine, trying to tidy up the house, when I looked out the window and there she was again, at my gate. I couldn't believe my eyes. The feeling of helplessness intensified when I saw her, with a look that clearly said, "I don't give a damn about your rules." The situation escalated quickly. I called the police again, and she seemed completely out of control. Seeing her in my yard was the last thing I wanted to deal with. She started screaming, making a scene, and it felt like she was determined to turn my day into a complete disaster. The police arrived quickly, and finally, they managed to get her under control. I watched, with a mix of relief and frustration, as she was handcuffed and taken away. The idea that things had gotten to this point was almost unbelievable. I hoped that, after all this, I could finally find some peace and try to move on. The drama was ending, but the feeling of invasion and the fear left behind didn't fade easily. I never thought a simple trip to Walmart could turn into a nightmare. I was 14 years old, and it was just another typical Saturday. I decided to drop by the store to pick up some school supplies, and as usual, I was in that half-dazed state. I grabbed a cart, checked my list, and walked into the store, expecting it to be just another boring errand. The Walmart was pretty quiet. I was lost in the school supply aisle, checking out notebooks and pens, when I noticed an old guy staring at me from a distance. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but that look was more intense than a casual glance. It felt off. Then, the guy came over. He was an older man with gray hair and a smile that didn't quite sit right. "Hey, kid! What are you looking for?" he asked with a grin that seemed forced. I tried to be polite, but he just wouldn't back off. He kept asking questions that got more intrusive by the minute, like he was digging for personal information disguised as small talk. "What's your school? How long have you lived around here?" Something felt seriously wrong, and I could feel my unease growing. I tried to walk away, but he kept following me, always with a new question. When he mentioned knowing where I went to school, I freaked out. My heart was racing, and I knew I had to get out of there. I threw the stuff I had picked up into the cart, and started walking fast through the aisles, trying to ignore him. I did my best not to look back, but the fear was overwhelming. As I reached the checkout area, the thought of him possibly following me again made me move even faster. I glanced over my shoulder and sure enough, he was still there, watching me. My heart was pounding. I panicked. I ducked into the first store I saw, a clothing shop, and hid behind a stack of clothes. My heart was racing, and I was trying to catch my breath. Through the store's glass doors, I saw him waiting outside. He was just standing there, clearly waiting for me to come out. I tried to pull myself together and went to find help. I approached a Walmart employee and quickly explained what was happening. He seemed a bit skeptical, but agreed to walk back with me to the area where I had seen the man. Of course, when we got there, the guy was gone. I looked around, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, but he had vanished. I felt a brief moment of relief, but the fear lingered. I just wanted to leave, and my mom was waiting for me in the parking lot. I couldn't hide my panic when I got to the car. I told her everything, and she was just as worried as I was. We decided I shouldn't go shopping alone for a while. In the following week, I couldn't get that encounter out of my head. Every time I went out, especially to public places, I felt like I was being watched. Just going to the supermarket turned into a scary experience. Whenever I entered a store, I'd scan the place, half expecting to see him lurking around. It was like the safety I once felt in familiar places was shattered. I started avoiding going out alone, and every movement I made was tinged with fear of running into that man again. My trips to Walmart were never the same. I would constantly check my surroundings, and even seeing someone who vaguely resembled him made me shiver. What's even more unsettling is that I never saw him again. The feeling that he could be out there, watching me, didn't go away. Sometimes I wonder if he was just curious or if there was something more sinister behind those questions. But the bottom line is, that day changed the way I see the world around me. Fear and insecurity became part of my everyday life, and I realized that sometimes, the most ordinary things can hide the greatest dangers.